Have you ever stood at a crossroads in life where you knew you had to make a decision, but neither choice felt safe or easy? This is where we find Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah today. Thank you for joining me for week 2 of the Ruth Bible study. Last week we saw how the book of Ruth begins, not with hope, not with fame, but with famine, with loss, and with emptiness. Naomi's life had completely fallen apart and unraveled. Today's passage doesn't bring closure, but it brings hope. It brings a little bit of movement. So let's get into the passage today. We're reading verses 6 through 14 in chapter 1. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." Movement begins before healing does. Then she arose with her daughter-in-laws to return from the country of Moab. After about 10 years in Moab, Naomi hears the news that changes everything. The Lord had visited his people by giving them food. Bethlehem had bread again, and Naomi wanted to return home. This is the first time God's covenant name, Yahweh, appears in the book. Visited is the key word here. In Hebrew, this word means to notice, to attend to intervene, or to show care. God had shown care, intervened, and attended to his people in Bethlehem. It signals that God has not forgotten his people, even though it felt that way for a long time. I know for many of us, there are moments in time they feel like forever to us, but they're a snapshot to God. But it feels like it's been so long since I've heard his voice, so long since I've felt his touch, so long since I've sensed his presence. But God wants you to know that he has not forgotten you. And just as he intervened in Bethlehem for his people, he will intervene for you. Just as he intervened and brought food and bread, he will intervene for you. But notice something important here. Naomi doesn't suddenly feel healed. She doesn't suddenly feel like, oh, there's good news. Now everything's great. I'm going to go back home and everything's whoopee. No, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like she was suddenly knew that everything was going to be okay, that everything was healed. She didn't have a plan ahead of her. She didn't know what it was going to look like. She just simply knew that it was time for her to go back to Bethlehem. She had heard a word that the Lord had intervened. And just hearing that, she knew that something was going to change, even though she wasn't healed in this moment. Sometimes obedience looks like movement before the healing. Sometimes obedience looks like we take the step before we feel like we can take the step. Sometimes obedience feels like just a tiny baby step. And that baby step to God is a humongous step. But it's just that first step of believing the word of the Lord, of believing that He has said something and that it is going to happen. So upon his word, just think of Peter and the disciples when they were in the boat and they had fished all night and there was no fish and they were catching nothing. And Jesus said, throw the nets back out. And they're like, Lord, we've been fishing all night. We've caught nothing. But because you say so, we will do it. They threw the net out, not because there were fish jumping out of the water, not because they saw fish swimming around the boat, not because they saw anything, they didn't feel anything, they didn't know if anything was going to happen, but because the Lord said so, because Naomi had heard that the Lord had intervened, she was making a move. Naomi let go, even though she felt empty. In verses 8 to 9, Naomi stops and says something heartbreaking. She says, go, return each of you to your mothers, return to your home. Even though she knew she would be alone, even though she was heartbroken and she had lost everything, she was still letting go of these girls because she wanted them to have a good life and she loved them. In the ancient world, returning to your mother's house meant starting over, seeking a remarriage. Both of their husbands had died. They were free now to go and seek remarriages and find new families. It was a chance to have safety and provision where they didn't have that with Naomi, and there was nothing looked like they would have. There was no future for it with Naomi. Naomi blesses Ruth and Orpah in the name of Yahweh and invokes his kindness toward them. She wasn't leaving them angry. She wasn't upset with them. She was content because she believed that the Lord was going to take care of her. The key word here is hesed, and hesed means steadfast love, covenant loyalty, and faithful kindness. Hesed. That's what God has shown us. Even though Naomi feels abandoned, she still speaks blessing. She does not speak harm or hurt or anger toward the girls just because she is hurt or just because she has lost. She speaks kindness toward them. Grief doesn't erase Naomi's faith. It's okay to grieve. We need to go through the grieving process. Grief is a part of life. It's a healthy part of life. But it doesn't take away our faith. You can still grieve and have faith. It's just allowing the Lord to step into that grief with you. It helps to make our faith stronger. It helps to put things in us that holds us when the next time comes along that we grieve. Naomi releases them, not out of bitterness, but out of love. She doesn't want them to suffer simply because she is suffering. She is looking out for the good of someone else. In verse 10, here we see that emotion is real, but commitment is later tested. They said to her, no, we will return with you. They're saying, no, we're going to go with you. It's okay. We're going to go with you. The response is sincere. They are prepared to go with Naomi. Both Orpah and Ruth are prepared to go with Naomi back to Bethlehem. Their tears are real. The emotion is genuine. They're not giving up on her. But it's still an emotional response, not a settled decision. Loving someone deeply is not the same as choosing their path. At this moment, Ruth and Orpah are both willing to go with Naomi. And Naomi's telling them, no, you go back to your home. She loves them, but love doesn't mean making them go a certain way. Love doesn't mean choosing their path for them. Love means I'm going to love you, but I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to let you choose your own path. But they are both sincerely willing in this moment to go with Naomi. In verses 11 through 13, faith tells the truth here because Naomi pushes back. She knows, in reality, it's not good for these girls to go with her. She knows they need to go back to their homes, to their mothers, to their families. They need to go back for safety and protection. She knows that she doesn't have any sons to offer. She has no future provision for them. She has no safety, no shelter, nothing for them. And she knows that God's hands are feeling heavy against her right now. But she still wants to do what's best for Ruth and Orpah, not thinking about herself, but thinking about them and their future and how she doesn't see a future for them if they go with her. Naomi references levirate marriage, which is mentioned in Deuteronomy 25. This is where a male relative could redeem a widow, but Naomi has no one left to offer. She has no more sons, and she says in the passage that even if she had sons, it would take a long time for those sons to grow up and for Ruth and Orpah to be able to marry them. So she has nothing to offer them, no relatives to offer them, no more sons to offer them. And she says one of the rawest lines in Ruth. She says, "The hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Now, this isn't Naomi being negative. This isn't Naomi saying, "Poor, pitiful me." This is just Naomi telling the truth and lamenting. Naomi still believes that God is sovereign, and she feels that he's still with her, but she feels wounded by him. Biblical faith makes it okay to feel wounded by God. It makes it okay to grieve. It makes it okay to question. It makes it okay to doubt. That none of those things mean that you don't have faith. That's being honest. That's being real. That's not this name it and claim it, pop psychology, positive thinking. Oh, everything's good and God's going to be with me and I'm going to be fine and it's all going to be hunky-dory and lollipops and candy canes. It's not. She's being real. She's being honest. And that, I think, is more faith when you can go to those deep places. You can go to those dark places. You can find the dark night of the soul. But yet, you can still hold your faith. You can hold both things at once. The dark night of the soul and your faith that God is still good can be held at once. It doesn't mean we've lost that faith or that goodness of God just because we're in the dark night of the soul. Now in verse 14, this is where the divide comes. This is where Ruth and Orpah are set apart. Two women, two responses, but two different paths that they take. And one isn't necessarily wrong or right. It's just two different decisions for two different people. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Orpah kisses her, which in this culture is a respectful goodbye. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go my way, just like you offered. But Ruth clings. She does not say goodbye. The Hebrew word for clung is debak, meaning to cleave, to hold fast, and to bind oneself. It's the same word used today for the marriage covenant in Genesis 2:24. Let's go there and see that. 2:24 says, "This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." This is also Israel clinging to the Lord in Deuteronomy 10:20. It says, "You must fear the Lord your God and worship him and cling to him. Your oaths must be in his name alone." Orpah, again, wasn't wrong in the decision that she made. That was the decision that she wanted to make for her life. And Naomi offered that decision. So it wasn't like she was going against what Naomi wanted her to do or asked her to do. She chose safety, she chose familiarity, and she chose what makes sense. And sometimes we come to a crossroad and there's not necessarily a wrong path. There's a path where God is showing you something that he wants to do in your life. And this thing is scary and it's not familiar and it doesn't feel good. And if you take this path, you're going to step into some unknown territory, places you've never been. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know if there's going to be provision. You don't know if there's going to be safety there. But if you go that way, you will get to experience exciting things with God. You will get to see God's hand at work like you never would if you take the other road. You will get to see blessings that God will bring. You'll get to see lives change. You'll get to see so many things if you take this path. Many missionaries face that kind of crossroad when they have to leave the country. They get to see so many amazing things that they would never see and experience God in ways that they would never experience Him and live in a place of faith, excitement. And yes, there will be scary things and there will be things that will be difficult along that road, but you know that God's provision is with you and God's hand is with you. But there's also the other road you can take that is safe and familiar, and God isn't going to be mad at you if you take that road. He's not going to berate you if you take that road. He's not going to steal His blessings from you if you take that road, but you just will not get to experience the things that you would have experienced if you would have took the unfamiliar road. And so Orpah here, she chooses the safety, the familiarity, and what makes sense. And that's okay. And that doesn't mean that God took His presence away from Orpah or took His love away from Orpah or took any blessings away from Orpah. It just means that she wanted what was safe, and Ruth decides to take the uncertainty. And so even though God's still with Orpah, Ruth chooses the hard road. She chooses the uncertainty. She chooses the poverty. She chooses the foreign land. She chooses a God that she doesn't know because she was a Moabite. She wasn't worshiping Naomi's God. So she chooses this path, even though Orpah takes the safe road and God's still with her. Ruth is taking this road that she doesn't know at this time is going to bring God's blessings upon her in a way that she never would have had if she would have went back with Orpah. This was the moment that Ruth stepped onto the path of faith. This was the moment that she took that baby step before she ever saw anything change. So I want to get into some theological insights here. That God often begins His work with our decision, not with the miracle moment. It is in that moment when we decide, I'm going to say yes, God. Even though this other path is more familiar and safer, and I know I'm going to be okay on that path, and it makes more sense, and this path you're asking me to take doesn't make any sense. Even though those two things are there, I'm going to choose this path. And God knows that moment when we say, I'm going to choose this path. This is the path I'm going to walk. Even before we've ever taken a step on that path. I think about the Israelites and when they came to the Jordan River and Joshua was leading them. And the moment they stepped into the river, the waters parted. Well, this is talking about not the moment they stepped, but this is talking about the moment they decided to step into the water. This is when God began His work. The moment they decided to step into the water is when God began to work. It wasn't actually when the water parted that God started working. He was working before then. And with Ruth, God is already working before she ever takes that first step. God begins working in our lives the moment that we say, yes, Lord. The miracle comes later, but the decision is now. Honest lament is not unbelief. Naomi's pain was part of her story. It was not a detour from it. It was not her taking a path that God didn't tell her to take. It was part of her story. Love releases, but faith clings. So Naomi released both of the girls, but Ruth clung to Naomi. Even though Orpah decided to go ahead and go, Naomi still loved her, but Ruth clung to Naomi. And God can work through both. He can work through the releasing that Naomi did, and He can work through the clinging that Ruth did. Turning points shape our destinies. One woman returns to Moab, and one woman steps into the line of Christ. Again, God loves them both, but how awesome of a future and how awesome of a lineage did Ruth get to be a part of because she chose to take that step. And she gets to step into being the line of Christ. Her legacy gets to be part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. That is amazing that one decision in our life can make that big of an impact, can impact generations ahead of us. Just one decision, not even that step, but that one decision to make that step. The moment she decided, generations ahead were changed. So some application for us today. God may call you to move before you feel healed or before you feel safe or whatever it may be. He may cause you to move before the healing comes, before the deliverance comes, before the freedom comes. Just like he did with Naomi. He called her to move back to Bethlehem before she actually saw what she heard was there, before she actually saw that it was safe again, before she actually saw that there was bread there, before she actually saw that God had intervened. She began to move. Clarity doesn't always come first. We don't always get all the details first, even though I am a very detail-oriented person. I need to have the plan, and I need to have the escape plan, just in case the plan doesn't work. And then I need to have plan B with that escape plan, just in case that doesn't work. But that isn't always the way that God works. He doesn't always give us that clarity. He doesn't always give us the details. I mean, normally he doesn't. It's just take the first step. It's make that decision. You are allowed to be honest about how heavy life feels. God can handle your truth. He's not someone who's not secure in himself. He can handle your truth. He knows you. He knows your heart. He knows where you're at. He knows you're human. And you don't hurt him when you let him know, God, you've hurt me. I'm mad. I'm disillusioned with you. I don't understand. I doubt. That's fine with him. He can take it. He can take it. Not everyone can walk with you into your new season. Orpah couldn't go with Naomi and Ruth. It just wasn't for her to go. And we can't take everyone into our new season. There are some people that God doesn't want to go into your new season. Maybe they're negative. Maybe they tear you down. Maybe they will block something that God wants for you. You cannot take everyone into your new season. There may be people that have been your friends for a long time, but God says, nope, this is where that ends because they're not going to be good for what I have for you in your new season. So you can take everyone with you. Some people aren't meant for that chapter. Some people are not meant for your whole story. I mean, it's like, okay, this person, I was using this person in your life, or I was using you in their life in chapter 1, but they can't go with you in chapter 2 because this is a new place and they're not meant for that place. And there may be someone who was in chapter 1 that will be with you at the end of the story. And there may be someone who comes along in the last chapter, chapter 12, and God does that. He brings different people at different times that we need. I mean, I've had friends that have come and gone, and doesn't mean I'm angry with them. It doesn't mean that we don't associate. It's just that they weren't supposed to go with me into my next chapter. Faith often looks like clinging when everything else feels uncertain. Ruth doesn't know the ending. She just knows who she's choosing. She just knows that she's going with Naomi because that's what she feels like is right. She clings, she debacks to Naomi because that's what feels right to her. Even though it feels uncertain, it still feels right. The decision you make in grief may echo further than you know. Again, Ruth's choice affects generations to come. It affected you, it affected me because we needed Christ and she was part of that line and that lineage. So Ruth reminds us that God often meets us at crossroads. Not when everything is clear, not when everything is easy, not when faith is easy, but when we decide. It's like I was talking about in my Real Talk this week, deciding that I'm going to change my thoughts. There are things that we have to decide. We decide that we're not going to go back to what's familiar. We're not going to take the pathway we've always taken, but we're going to forge a new pathway. And it's going to bring good things and it's going to be better, but we're going to have to trust God to form that new pathway. We're not going to be able to do it without trust. We're going to have to trust him in the unknown. We're going to have to trust him in the shaky things. We're going to have to trust him in so many pieces of that new pathway. Whereas that old pathway felt really familiar and we were really comfortable and it felt safe. And really, we didn't have to trust God too much. There were times when, we had to trust him, but it was pretty safe to us. It was pretty comfortable. But this new decision is going to be uncertain and it's going to take faith. So I hope that this spoke to you today. I hope that somewhere in this you could see yourself in Naomi in having to let go and having to release someone and having to know that even though you love them, you can't choose for them. And I hope that you can see yourself in Ruth in that you sometimes have to make that decision to go away that's uncertain and hard and where you will have to trust God. But knowing, and the thing about it is here that Ruth didn't even know Naomi's God. So she was basically just clinging to Naomi. She was clinging to what she felt, well, this is the way I'm supposed to go. We know that that was God, but she didn't even know God here. So she wasn't even in the position we are if we have believed in Jesus and we trust God. She was in a position of really not having even that safety. So it's like a blind decision for her, but she clung to Naomi. So she got to be a part of his story. If this passage spoke to you, if you're standing at a crossroad or you're feeling uncertain about a decision, I just want to encourage you that God has something great ahead. It may not always feel great and in circumstances may not always look great, but if we will trust him, amazing things will happen just like it did for Ruth. And we're going to find that out as we get into the next couple of weeks of how God turned things for Ruth because of that one decision to cling to Naomi. And we're not clinging to a person. We are clinging to Jesus Christ, the one who never changes, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, the one for whom it is impossible to lie, the one for whom he shuts the mouths of lions and he opens the seas and he opens blinded eyes and he raises the dead and he called everything into existence that do not exist. That's the one that we are clinging to. That's the one that we are debauching to. That's the one that we are trusting in. So if that's you, if you're at a crossroad, maybe it's a crossroad of having to release someone, or maybe it's a crossroad of having to step into the unknown and the uncertain, put a comment so I can pray for you. And make sure that you're subscribed so you do not miss a week of Ruth, because it's going to get better and better as we look into Ruth and the powerful declaration of loyalty that she makes in verses 15 through 18 next week. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you share this with someone who needs it this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you back here again next week for week 3 of Ruth.